she was reaching for me. So I just kind of like grabbed her hand and I leaned over her because you can't hear anything. The aircraft was firing up. And she asked me if she was going to die. And I couldn't really hear what she was saying, and I got really low down and I listened to her, and she said, "Am I going to die?" And I said, "Well, we're never really supposed to answer questions like that." But I told her, "No, you're not. You're not going to die."
From Stars Air Ambulance, this is Mission Ready, presented by WBM Technologies.
Welcome to Mission Ready. This is episode 3 of a deep dive into A Mission by Stars. We're a non-profit healthcare organization that provides pre-hospital critical care from 6 bases throughout Western Canada. I'm Deborah Tetley.
And I'm Lyle Aspinall. So far in the story, we've learned that Marcia Burkett has been attacked by a cougar while camping with coworkers in a remote mountainous cut block.
We've also learned Marcia is the girlfriend of Stars pilot Josh Brewster, who has just finished a late shift and has handed off flying duty to the night crew. The Stars crew, including advanced care paramedic Russell Bardak and flight nurse Kelly Holt, is aware they're responding for someone they know. Stars crew members are professionals and care for all patients with the same precision, pride, and passion. But there's no denying this mission had an extra layer, an emotional one. Here's Kelly.
I wasn't going to let her die. She was very stable, but I knew she was scared because she didn't know, right? She didn't know, but I did. She was very stable, and the bleeding had stopped, and her vital signs were stable, and she was doing well, very well. But I do remember that, so I guess that's how I knew she was scared. Even before we got into the aircraft, she just looked frightened. It was very dark, but when I got down close to her, she just, the way she was looking at me. But Russell and I were pretty reassuring, and we told her we were going to take good care of her, and I hope she believed us.
In this episode, Kelly and Russell will take us from the hangar and the ready room in Grande Prairie, Alberta, to the remote scene, and they'll recount the mission to provide urgent care and transport for Marcia. They'll explain what it's like to not only care for a critically injured patient, but also someone they know, and what it's like to do this at a chaotic scene while en route to hospital in a helicopter.
As our crew headed toward Nose Mountain, news of the cougar attack kickstarted several background conversations at the Stars Emergency Link Center in Calgary, not the least of which was locating Stars pilot and Marcia's boyfriend Josh Brewster, and letting his leaders know what was happening. Leo LeBlanc was in the ELC that night, and remembers the feeling in the room.
You have a lot of empathy. The first thing is, and I can speak on, I think in general, it's like any paramedic or doctor. I think by nature, if you're doing this kind of profession, you're there to help. It's your first instinct is you want to help. I've been at Stars for 14 years. My take on this whole career path is I take it as though every call that I take, it's my wife that's at the other end of the call. My mistakes impact some time on my wife's life. If I made an error, a critical error, anything that I do that is not helpful, delayed a rescue, delayed anything, it impacts the life of my wife. And so if you have that mentality, I treat every patient that way. It doesn't matter if you're an 84-year-old or a 6-month-old. So when you hear the fact that it's somebody that you just kind of, to me, it just hits home going like, well, I treat every call like that. But it could be me. I mean, this could have been me getting the phone call saying, hey, by the way, we were giving you a heads up. Here's what we know. Here's what we can tell you. So it gets a little emotional. The beauty of it is the Link Center has been around for so long. We do have people for myself, if need be, we have team leads. Some people will take the reins on certain things. We know from experience. We're talking about, I was involved in the Humboldt incident, the Pine Lake tornadoes, the stage that collapsed at Camrose. So every time you do these incidents, you definitely get some experience on it. So the mood is to stay professional, of course, keep your emotions in check because we do have a job to do, but now we have extra tasks. So let's make sure that we continue the extra task, we do the extra task, but we just keep our emotions in check even though we know it's personally linked.
For Kelly and Russell, this was the first time either of them had attended a call for a large predator attack. There was so much to think about as they prepared to land at the scene.
That cougar was still in the area, which was kind of frightening. We're always trained as AMC and a whole crew that the scene has to be safe. But for us to know that Marcy is laying there bleeding, potentially not stable, and for us to not be able to just land and run to her, it was a tough thought for me and Russell to think like we weren't going to be able to get to her as quickly as we'd like because of the fact that the cougar was still in the area.
So knowing that it was somebody that you were acquainted with and close to somebody that you knew, and knowing the cougar factor and all the unknowns and the weather, it was so many factors going on. How did you and Russell prepare for what you were about to see?
We knew that we were going to land in a certain spot and that we were going to have to walk and that it was muddy and that we were going to have to carry our bags into a kind of a treed, wooded, grassed area. And I can't remember how long the flight time was, but we talked about like keeping her warm, making sure that she was going to have analgesic on board and making sure if we had to like do any advanced care that we were ready.
We don't have a lot of time. The flight to Nose Mountain was 15 or 20 minutes. So we focus on absolutely sort of critical aspects of what we perceive the mission will be. We knew that it was a large predator versus Marcy, and we knew that there was some first aid on site. So what we needed to do is we prepared ourselves for a trauma. What pieces of equipment are we going to bring patient side? With most traumas, definitive care is in front of a surgeon or an emergency physician. We mitigate whatever damages or whatever has occurred. So we knew that we wanted to keep our scene time as short as possible. Scalp lacerations can be quite challenging in terms of trying to control the bleeding. We also had conversations just before the final approach with the pilots. We let them know what our thoughts were and what our preparation was, and that we would probably require their assistance in either patient movement or securing scene safety. We really didn't have a lot of information what we were going into. I remember
Before we walk you through Marcy's care and transport, let's learn a little bit more about Kelly and Russell. Russell worked at STARS for 8 years before retiring in 2020. In that time, he held roles as a community education leader, clinical operations manager, and paramedic at the Grand Prairie base. Kelly, meanwhile, currently works as an ER nurse, but her time with STARS remains one of the highlights of her career.
Yeah, people always would say, well, what's it like being a flight nurse at STARS? And I would always say, the hardest part was the aeronautical aspect of flying. The easy part was being a nurse. I knew how to be a nurse, but it was always the environment of the aircraft and the sounds and the weather. And
let's look a bit deeper into their roles. On every STARS mission is a transport physician, a critical care nurse, and an advanced care paramedic. These members of the STARS air medical crew are on call at each base 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So what does it take to be part of a group like this?
In short, you have to be among the best of the best. You have to have at least 5 years of experience in an intensive care unit, critical care unit, or emergency room, or 5 years of experience with a high-performance EMS service as an advanced life support paramedic. Then, you must complete our 20-week Critical Care and Transport Medicine Academy.
Our transport physicians have decades of experience caring for the sickest of the sick. They're anesthesiologists, pediatric doctors, and emergency physicians working in trauma centers, operating rooms, and intensive care units.
When a call for help is received, a transport doctor ascertains the level and type of care the patient needs, the time sensitivity of their illness or injury, and the capacity of the sending facility. The physician triages the call and determines the best mode of transport for the patient, which could be ground ambulance, fixed-wing aircraft, or helicopter. Here's transport physician Dr. Liam McGowan getting a scene update early in Marcy's call.
Is this first aider putting direct pressure on the scalp wound?
Yeah.
And the victim she's awake, correct?
She's awake.
Any other injuries aside from the scalp?
Secondary injuries, I'm not sure. Didn't get a rundown, but primary injuries are her head. Her neck is intact. I don't know if it got any lower.
Okay.
Right now, we are securing a perimeter with shotguns and bear spray, so I haven't had much interaction.
Okay.
With the first aider.
Okay, well, can you just ensure that the first aider is applying firm pressure to the wounds?
He's going as hard as he can right now.
Okay. and the helicopter will be here shortly.
Okay, when I was there, he was applying pressure. He said they weren't leaking, they weren't bleeding through. His hands were dry.
Perfect.
And Dr. McGowan should say
Someone else who spent a lot of time on that same call with the STARS Emergency Link Center is Jenny Burgess, one of Marcy Burkett's colleagues at the scene. She has an eerie recollection of that night etched in her memory.
We were getting all the first aid stuff and the communication stuff and everything out of the truck and the shotgun and blah, blah, blah. And one coworker was running down there with a shotgun, another one with dogs, and the other two were turning her over and stabilizing her and whatnot. And the three of us, or the rest of us, were scrambling. It was quiet, it was calm, and it was dark, and and so it's eerie because somebody's out there trying to kill you, right? Like, essentially, it tried to kill one of us, and it's not something that you expect, right? And it's not something that I don't think most people that are really comfortable in the outdoors, like, I guess you just get used to and comfortable being out there, and you don't expect that. So that was definitely a contrast to just getting stuff done and getting her ready to go. I guess we just did everything that we could that we thought would make us safe as possible. We buddied up. We got our bear spray out. We stayed close to the vehicles as much as we could. We had the dogs nearby that seemed to chase the cougar off, because it did chase it off once, because it was kind of sneaking up there, and we heard them go after it. But it is eerie for sure. It's something I don't know how to explain, but you don't expect. So kind of primal fear, I guess.
That fear and the overall concern for their coworker drove the team of biologists to defend Marcy against further attacks while also applying effective first aid and setting up a landing zone for the STARS helicopter, which they were relieved to learn was on its way. Here's how Marcy remembers it.
It kind of has put everything else into perspective, but yeah, like lying in the cut block, just there's so many unknowns. I'm not trained in medicine. I don't know what is wrong with me or if it's going to be fatal. So yeah, for an hour and a half, they had to fight to protect me. Then, like off in the distance, I could hear stars approaching, and it was just kind of this feeling of relief that I'm going to get out of here. This is kind of like a nightmare we're living, and nobody can leave it until I'm out of here first.
Jenny was still on the phone with the STARS Emergency Link Center and breathed a sigh of relief as the helicopter and crew appeared.
Are they on the ground, Jenny? Excellent. You did a great job, Jenny. Thank you very much. You can disconnect.
With our helicopter now safely on the ground, Jenny was able to hang up the phone. Now, Flight Nurse Kelly Holt and Flight Paramedic Russell Bardak were on the ground and ready to go.
So when we exited the helicopter, there were some of Marcy's coworkers had approached, and we, as we were walking towards, it was maybe 30 or 40 meters away from where the helicopter landed to where Marcy was, we were getting some background information from from her coworkers, like what had exactly happened. We did chat about how we had to have a high situational awareness that, the cougar still might be around, even though it was a remote possibility. We just decided that we were going to all stick together. We weren't going to, if something was required from the helicopter, we weren't going to go back as an individual. We would go back as in groups of 2 or 3, just for our own safety.
And we did. We had to hike. We had help, thank goodness. And it's nice having help. And it's funny because it seems like whenever we get to a scene, there's always people that are willing to help, pull our stretcher, take our bags, as long as, they're allowed based on if we're going to be running or not. But there's usually always lots of people that want to help. So luckily, I remember somebody having a shovel, like somebody was going to look like taking after this cougar. If there was going to be, they had a shovel, and I was like, oh my gosh, okay, we're going to do this. We're going in with a shovel and all of our equipment.
It was heavily overcast. We're at a high elevation. The ceilings were low. They were still within acceptable limits, but it was still low. There was virtually like no ambient light, like moonlight or starlight wasn't a factor. And I remember it was extremely muddy. And in the Peace Country, the mud it got a high clay content, so it sticks to everything. So we exited the helicopter. It was not raining, but sort of intermittently showering. We were given sort of rapid fire information as we were walking to where Marcia was laying. And on initial assessment, you ask 4 questions to establish a level of consciousness. Marcia, she knew her name, she knew where she was, she knew what happened, and she recognized us. And then there's a big sense of relief.
Not all of our patients recall the moment when STARS arrives, but Marcia does.
One of the nicest things you can ever see is a STARS crew leaning over you, giving you a reassuring smile. Right away, I recognized Russ, and seeing Russ and Kelly leaning over me, Kelly giving me a reassuring smile, just made the situation so much better. It was a real feeling of relief, not just for me, but for everyone else in the cut block that I was getting out of there. The only people there were the biologists. It would have taken a lot longer for the Fish and Wildlife officers and the RCMP to arrive. So STARS were the first ones on scene with a cougar that had been trying to attack people nearby.
Mission Ready will be right back.
I'm Summer Hashem, Director of Technology at STARS. We absolutely enjoy working with WBM Technologies. They have a well-established process for client engagement, which really drives innovation and project success. As a technology partner, they understand our needs and goals and work to design effective solutions that are right for us. Like WBM, STARS has deep roots in the communities we serve across Western Canada. You could say we have a shared goal of being ready and available when people need us the most.
And now, back to the show. Jenny Burgess had so far not seen Marcia since the attack. She'd been up in the cut block on the phone with the STARS Emergency Link Center and guiding her colleagues through the steps of setting up a landing zone for the helicopter. Now, though, she was among the group that helped the STARS crew down into the bushes where Marcia lay.
So when you did get to hear her voice, what was that like?
Oh, I was just relieved that she was still alive. I didn't even know. I didn't even know how bad she was. I knew what had happened. Head wounds have a lot of bleeding, and we didn't realize the extent of how much head wounds bleed. Marcia actually was the one that had the most first aid training out of all of us. Most of us just had standard first aid. Some had wilderness, but Marcia had advanced wilderness, so she actually knew how to do a lot more than us. So she was... Marcia was helping us do first aid on her sometimes. And at one point, she had said that she had thought that her skull was fractured, that's dangerous, right? That's really scary. So anyway, I didn't even know what state she was in, right? I knew she was alive at that point, but there was people going back and forth, and they were taking stuff back and forth as they needed it, giving the 2 of us that were up top updates, but we didn't really know much until we saw her, right? So it was a relief to see her, and that she's... it's sad to see her in that state, and no one wants to see anyone in that state, regardless whether they're a good friend or not. But it's even harder when it's someone that you care about. So it was good that STARS was there with us and to help, right? Because that's what we needed at that point in time.
Although Kelly had never attended to injuries from a large animal attack before, if there's one thing she knew, it was that Marcia's pain would have been excruciating. So taking care of that was her priority.
Well, I remember getting down into the ground and just talking to her and saying, "Hi, Marcia, it's Kelly. How are you doing?" And she was talking to me, and she was visibly scared and frightened. And I remember getting down and starting an IV. Somebody held up a light for me, and I started an IV on her, and I give her some fentanyl right away to relieve her pain, because she was having quite a bit of pain in her head and her face.
So how quickly is that going to work? How quickly will she start feeling better after taking fentanyl through an IV?
Oh, fairly quickly, within like 5 to 10 minutes. And she was a small girl, and it would have worked fairly quickly for her.
Because up to that point, she'd been out there a couple hours without without any pain medication.
Right.
What do you imagine her pain being at?
I imagine it was fairly high. Like, we always use a pain scale, and I probably didn't ask her what her pain was on a scale from 0 to 10, but I just assumed that she was having a lot of pain and she needed something, and she didn't refuse. So
At this point, the biologists did what they could to lend support while the STARS crew worked. Here's Jenny again.
I think I was helping with the IV pole, if I remember right, or something like that. Or I was standing on the opposite side, and I remember one of my coworkers, he was standing right next to Marcy, and I said, "Hang on to her hand," because she was scared. And I said, "Hang on to her hand." And so he reached over and he hanged on to her hand. I thought that was really nice. So, because it's scary in that moment for everyone, right? So, especially Marcy. Yeah, so we just helped her get on to stretcher. We actually carried the stretcher down there. And then it took all 7 of us plus them to get her out of there with all their gear and all the various implements that were attached to her. So, and then we helped load her up and they flew away. And we all stood there and watched her fly away. And there was definitely a period of stunned silence. I will tell you that every time I hear a helicopter now, it brings me a sense of relief. It was the hugest feeling of relief that finally someone that had better skills than us could take care of Marcy, right? So, yeah, it was the greatest sense of relief ever. I don't know how else to say it. That's truly how it was. So.
Both Kelly and Russell complimented the first aid that was already applied at the scene by Marcy's colleagues, particularly the efforts to control her bleeding and to keep her warm.
Her coworkers, her first responders, did an excellent job in terms of providing her with that initial hemorrhage control. They had bandaged and packaged. They kept her warm, which is critical in a trauma. We actually did very minimal interventions on scene because our internal time clocks were clicking away, and we knew that the best possible outcome for Marcy was at the hospital.
With Marcy tucked safely into the helicopter, Kelly and Russell by her side, the pilots lifted off and headed for Grand Prairie.
Inside the helicopter, the medical crew continued to work on keeping Marcy stable, checking her vitals, controlling her pain, and making sure she was comfortable for the flight.
I held her hand the whole way. I remember that. I remember using one hand to get stuff, and Russell was helping me. And it was, she was stable. She was, it was a pretty easy flight. And Russell and I were just like making sure that she was comfortable and that she felt safe and that she knew she was going to be okay, and made sure she was stable with her vital signs. And yeah, just providing analgesic.
It all went well. And, part of being in pre-hospital care is we bring calm to chaos. And we can bring calm to chaos in a number of manners, basically, with our skills, with the equipment that we have, the knowledge that we have, and then sometimes just like one person reaching out and calming and talking to another. And I would say that Kelly and I, even though until the moment we actually saw Marcy, there was some trepidation. However, we were calm and we were trying to do our best to put those like Marcy's coworkers at ease.
Nearly everyone we've talked to for this podcast has expressed to us a sense of pride in their role in being there for Marcy that day.
For Russell Bardak, who knew Jenny as a teen from their competitive skiing days and who worked with Josh, this mission hit close to home.
Russell, I know you're a professional and you've been doing this a long time, but did you have a moment where you just kind of had a second to catch your breath and realized what you had just witnessed and the fact that it was somebody that was close to the STARS family or part of the STARS family? Did you ever have that moment where you went, wow?
It filled me with a level of gratitude that I was able to Kelly and I and Andy and Ed, we were available for Marcy when she needed help. I had a sense of honor that I was on this mission responding to somebody that I was acquainted with.
For Jenny Burgess and the other biologists at the scene, their pride came largely from a strong sense of teamwork.
I think everyone had that moment where they just did what they needed to do. Like, I was really proud of everyone. I think everyone did an excellent job, and they really did just what they needed to do, and no one, lost it and kind of had to back away and not help. But everyone did what they needed to do. But you could see in everyone's eyes at some point, while we were waiting before Stars got there, that they realized, like, this is really bad and this is real and this is what's going on. They took a moment and they composed themselves and kept on going. And it was really, I don't even know how to word this, but it's really great to see that everyone just pulled together and did what needed to do. And that's truly wonderful, wonderful teamwork, right? To help save Marcy. So yeah, we're all key components of that, regardless of what they were doing.
It's what we mean when we say we can't do this life-saving work without the support of our allies. Everyone from the first call to 911, to our partners in emergency response, to the donor who ensures we have the best resources.
And in this case, it was a group of biologists on a mountainside who fought tirelessly for their friend to make certain she received the care she needed. It ultimately meant the dread filling Marcy's mind could be replaced by something much more powerful.
It just brings you hope, like a feeling of hope that you know that you're in a really remote location that's very hard access. It was even hard getting a call out to get help, but to know that there's people that are able to reach you, it's just so great to have them there. You know that you're going to get the best care available, but it was also nice knowing that they were friends of mine that were arriving there. Like my husband, he works for Stars, so I always hear about the calls he goes on. And you know people that have gone on calls, but you never expect that person is going to be you. And you never really expect that there's so many odd coincidences that can happen and how it will impact you as a family, your coworkers, your husband's coworkers, how everybody kind of comes together.
Marcy's husband is Josh Brewster, a Stars pilot. The two were dating at the time, and he had just finished his day shift when Marcy's call came in. At this point in the story, he's driving to the hospital helipad in Grand Prairie, where he would meet up with his colleagues and Marcy.
Yeah, everything's out of your hands. I mean, you train to have control over those kind of situations, but in the end, there's really not a lot you can do. You just kind of let the scenario play itself out. You know that the right people are in the right place to do what they can, and that's really all you can ask them to do. It was, very reassuring because it's not like I'd been off shift for a week or two and didn't know who was on, because then I'd be phoning madly as to who was on the crew and what's going on. Obviously, I'd just done the passover with the captain was Andy Stewart, first officer was Ed Coleman, medic was Russell Bardak, and our nurse was Kelly Holt. So I knew whatever was going on that she'd be in good hands, and I knew that on the medical side and on the aviation side, I knew that Andy was an excellent captain and he'd do everything that he possibly could.
At the hospital helipad, Josh would be joined by Marla Tabler, an off-duty Stars nurse who was a close friend to the couple. They waited in silence, finding themselves on the other side of a mission for a change and feeling uneasy in this unfamiliar territory.
Because we didn't know, and we, Josh knows, I know how bad these calls can be. So that we didn't say a lot. We just kind of stood there and waited because we didn't know what to expect. But it was definitely a different feeling. It was very anxious, very much more emotional than any other call I'd ever been involved in, for sure.
Next time on Mission Ready, and we have to warn you, some people might find this graphic.
And I remember at one point, Marcy, she said, I think my forehead must be really swollen, hey? What she thought was swelling over her eyes was actually her forehead falling down over her eyelids, so she couldn't see it. So I would kind of hold her forehead up a little bit. I was like, is that better? She's like, oh yeah, that is better. So I think there was an element of protection too, not telling her exactly how bad it was. She hadn't seen herself. We weren't going to show her at that time.
Mission Ready, presented by WBM Technologies, is researched and produced entirely in-house by me, Deborah Tetley.
And me, Lyle Aspinall. We're part of the Stars communications team. Mission Ready contains original theme music by Kaya Gamble, the daughter of one of our longtime former pilots. Find her at kayagamble.com. That's Kaiya Gamble.com.
Subscribe to Mission Ready wherever you found it so you don't miss an episode, and rate and review wherever possible. Be sure to tell others about it too. And if they don't know how to access a podcast, please show them how, or just point them to stars.ca/podcast, where they will find several ways to listen. We've also created a bonus episode of Mission Ready that tells the story of how STARS began. We'll release it at the end of this season.
Our ability to provide world-class patient care since 1985 is only possible because you make it happen. As a charity, we rely on support from the public so we can be there for the next patient who needs us. To donate and to join our fight for life, please visit stars.ca. Until next time, thanks for listening.